Your movie this week, Cow Sills, is called The Creeping Terror. And I just know you'll hate it.
This time, we watch Season 6, Episode 6, The Creeping Terror.
What if carpets came to Earth to try to conquer us all?
I mean, it would be phenomenal, but first, happy Halloween, Chris!
Happy Halloween, Charlotte. Have you done anything interesting for Halloween? Watched any scary movies beyond The Creeping Terror?
I have. Taking a request from a listener, I did go back and watch the original John Carpenter's The Fog, which is indeed a spooky movie for spooky season.
I think that was more than one listener who urged you to please do that.
Oh, in fact, it was also you. I mean, credit where credit is due. In the very episode, you told me, now wait a second, that was a remake. And I was like, no, totally got that one wrong. Should have watched the original The Fog. And it is entirely true. I should have watched the original The Fog. Like, spoiler alert, everyone, but it was so much better.
Also, we have to celebrate the centennial, the 100th birthday of one of our favorites, Ed Wood, on October 10th, 1924, came into this world to show us the way and show us how it's done and make some very, very interesting and some terrible ones, but some very interesting and, I'd argue, some really good ones. But anyway, we will be celebrating a bit of Ed Wood. That's one of the reasons why we're doing The Creeping Terror as our little scary movie. Because, of course, Ed Wood is often said to be one of the worst directors of all time, and Plan 9 from Outer Space has often been called the worst movie ever made, and nah, this one's way worse. This one is way worse, and the guy behind it is also way worse, but we'll talk about that in a bit.
Oh, that sounds like a super fun conversation, Chris. I can't wait. Can we just talk about The Fog some more? It was a really good movie.
I have one more piece of follow-up before we get on to actually talking about The Creeping Terror, though. I talked about Trek novels, Star Trek novels.
Yes, you did. Did you read the one written by Q?
No one said I should, and therefore I have not done it. But many people wrote in to say that my suspicions were correct, that he was not the only Star Trek alum to write a novel from their character's point of view. And in fact,
who was it?
Specifically, as I suspected, Billy Boy Shatner did in fact write a few novels about Kirk. Many people wrote in to let me know that that was the case, but...
Did they suggest one you should actually read?
No one did. No one did. But Rex Thrillhouse over on Blue Sky gets bonus points for pointing out that Andy Robinson has written a novel about his character, Garak, from Deep Space Nine. It's called A Stitch in Time. It's something he started writing as an autobiography from the character's point of view. Like, I guess it was something he did in downtime on set, and he would read excerpts from it at conventions, and it was very popular, and he was convinced to turn it into a proper novel. And
oh my gosh.
It's out there. And I'm told that he did the audiobook.
Oh my gosh.
And that would be delightful, because I did watch a bit of Deep Space Nine, and that's a fun character.
That seems like the very best way for a novel about your character to be created. Like, it's not Star Trek's been gone and I have some nostalgia for this character that I played. It's like, no, I'm an actor on set and I'm thinking about my own character's backstory to kind of flesh them out in my mind, even if it's something that I never actually comes up on the show, right? It's something that helps me give a full life to my character. And then it's just like, oh, I'm just sharing this in bits and pieces. I'm getting this really great feedback, and I'm gonna flesh it out a little bit further. Like, what a wonderful organic way for that to be created and introduced to the world. I'm kind of really charmed by this.
I am too. But no one has said that they read any of these books, and certainly nobody was recommending it. Listeners, if that's you, if you want to say, actually, this one's a good one, you should try it. I mean, I'll listen. I'll take it under advisement. My to-read pile is larger than the Empire State Building, but still... I'm always happy to add to that pile, obviously.
Obviously, yes. Me too. Ooh, I could read one.
All right, but we simply must move on and talk about this movie.
Must we, Chris?
Technically, yeah. This time we watch Season 6, Episode 6, The Creeping Terror. One day, the aliens landed in Angel County, California. There were 2 aliens, each maybe 7 feet tall or so, and 20 feet long, and made out of what looked like carpet remnants hastily stitched together. One of the aliens decides to stay in the ship, but the other heads off and wanders the land looking for tasty humans to eat. Unfortunately, the terror really does creep along at a snail's pace, giving its potential victims plenty of time to run away. But, luckily for it, the local humans just don't run away at all. And so the alien has plenty of time to lumber up and swallow the victims whole. Some of them even seem to be hurling themselves into the monster's maw. Mostly the victims are young women, and the repeated shots of young women being eaten by a giant carpet alien really start to seem like, well, like the director had a particular interest, if you know what I mean. Who will stop these aliens? Well, it's a team effort with the local sheriff, a colonel, and some troops flown in for the emergency. And a big fancy scientist, of course, all working together to understand what's going on. Their main tactic is not telling the public a damn thing about what's going on, and also not evacuating anyone. So the creeping terror has lots and lots of victims to choose from. But eventually, they manage to destroy the aliens, though some of our heroes get hurt in the process. The scientist explains in his dying words that he's somehow figured out that the aliens are not life forms per se, but rather a kind of mobile computer, and that it wasn't so much eating the locals as it was analyzing them in order to transmit data about Earthlings back to its homeworld. The sheriff fails to stop the transmission from going off, so now the aliens know exactly what we're all about and will have a much easier time taking over Earth someday. Yay. The end.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, Tom Servo, doorman to the Satellite of Love, opens our episode by questioning the presence of one Mike Nelson. He can't just waltz in here and expect to see Crow. You have to sign in, Mike. Jeez. But so much doormanning has Tom sleeping on the job moments later when the Mads call. You know how we can't know how a certain someone eats and sleeps or other science facts? Well, we do know who does the laundry down in Deep 13. It's Frank. I mean, of course it's Frank. P.S. He also buys Dr. F's underwear. Shut up, it's true! Not nearly as cool or insightful as the coffee shop poetry slam that's going down on the Satellite of Love. GPC, by the way, is the folk singer feminist of my dreams. And all of that happens in the opening segments. Hey, do you love flags? Sure, we all do. How about patriotic pledges? Yep. And doesn't the Satellite of Love deserve one as well? You bet. And our favorite residents raise a flag and pledge their loyalty to the Satellite of Love. E pluribus, join us! What would jingoism be without love? Yes, it's love satellite style. In a fitting send-up of the very weird sketch show Love American Style, Crow is an inappropriate boss, and after misunderstandings galore, Mike makes out with Tom, and then with Crow. It's weird. Is this what love satellite style is? Well, now that I know what love is, thank you, foreigner, I want to hang out in Mike's pad and see his super cool stereo. That's not just a pickup line, it's a segment. Mike knows the names of all the parts of a stereo, and he names them. Yeah, he names them all. And he messes with the levels of all the things to make the music sound better. I mean, I thought seeing someone's stereo system was a euphemism about having someone in your bed, but it just doesn't quite work like that for Mike. He's serious about his stereo. When the movie ends, we see GPC has been inspired by the movie to consume Tom and Crow like a creeping terror. Crow's legs are hanging out of her mouth. Mike reads letters. GPC sneezes out Tom so we can check in with the Mads. Turns out Frank is no good at laundry. He has shrunk all of Dr. F's clothes. Yikes. Time to press the Frank. What do you think, sirs?
Had you seen this episode before?
I had not seen this episode before. I am certain I would have remembered the carpet monster.
Yeah. So were you expecting there to be a scene about giving a baby a rectal thermometer exam?
No. Why would I expect that? Why would I ever expect that, Chris?
I just think, it's interesting that it's in this film.
Well, I mean, the creeping terror has its little hole in the front, so I guess they had to think about something that has the hole in the back. I don't know.
Oh, my.
Why would you do that?
Only rectal thermometer exams pad the film. I watched this episode, which I've seen before many times, although I haven't seen it in a long time. And so,
Is it just what you remembered?
It's better than I remembered in many ways.
Wow.
But I watched it with my husband, who was just shocked at the incompetence of this movie.
In so many ways, right?
He's seen Manos.
Yeah, but even Manos isn't this. Manos is nowhere close to this bad.
Yeah, no, I agree.
The thing that was driving me nuts all the time is that the narrator would come on and tell us what was happening. And we would just see a scene of a couple of actors at each other, and then the narrator would tell us what was going on. These two people are having a conversation about what they're going to do about the monster, and it's oh, I don't know. We have actors on set, and maybe there's writers here somewhere. Could you write some dialogue for the actors, and maybe they could act out that scene rather than writing it?
Okay, but you're missing the one thing that they didn't have on set, which was a sound recorder.
Oh my gosh, there's still got to be a better way. It was all narration all the time.
But that's how they did Manos, right? They filmed that without any sound on set, and they overdubbed afterwards. That's why all the female characters are done by the same person in Manos.
Oh, man. I can't imagine having all the lines in that movie. That's fabulous. But seriously, that means that they could have written these people lines rather than having a narrator. But it was just so jarring. It's very much a thing now. You might have an opening narration, maybe a little check-in, and then maybe a closing narration, but not the whole movie.
Yeah, this is much more educational short from the 40s or 50s. This is Johnny at the Fair style filmmaking.
Seriously, it's like radio drama filmmaking is what it's like. You have a narrator there to tell you what you're looking at, and it's I'm looking at it. You don't have to tell me these two people are having a conversation. I can see that they are. I just can't hear them. Maybe if the narrator was quiet for 2 minutes, we could hear the dialogue.
There was plenty of times when the narrator just went away for a few minutes.
It's true, but they didn't fill that space with dialogue.
No.
They filled it with carpets moving across the countryside.
But the great thing about having that narrator there is that it meant that everybody got to do their narrator voice, which is always a delight.
Sure. Maybe they chose this movie only so they could do their narrator voice. They're you know what I've been working on? A narrator voice. What movie goes with that? The Creeping Terror. Yes, great, print it. Yeah, this movie was really bad, Chris.
Did you like The Creeping Terror, the monster?
I don't even know how to answer that question. What do you mean, did I like it?
Well, was he a cutie like some of the monsters we've seen? Was he,
no.
Was he scary?
Definitely not scary. I mean, scarier with people's legs hanging out the hole in the front, And you kind of got this weird tower with a diamond face, but it's not really a face. I don't even really know how to describe it. It looks like one of those dragons that they have as part of a Chinese New Year parade, except it's all low to the ground and you can't see anybody's feet, and it doesn't have a really cool head. It just has a weird diamond tower in the front. I'm trying to think if I would be scared if it was coming after me. And I'm sure that I would be because it does not look like anything of this earth, but it doesn't seem scary. It seems weird. I don't know. Would you be scared by it?
Well, I mean, the problem is that it moves so slowly. It's quite easy to get away from it, which really reduces the scare factor. I mean, I know there's a whole like slow zombies versus fast zombies kind of discourse out there, but they can't be this slow. They can't be as slow as a continental shelf.
Well, if it was subsuming South America, I would think it was scary. I've been in an earthquake. It's a different thing than this.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, my God.
You catch it the wrong angle. I'm sure it's quite terrifying.
Yes.
But it is really distinctive looking, so we'll give it points for that.
Sure. It's very strange. It's strange that nobody runs away. I know you pointed it out in your summary, but it just is so baffling that these people would just... They watch it come from like 50 feet away.
Yeah.
And they're screaming. And there's so much screaming. It's like the only sound they have is narrator and screaming.
Yeah, those are the easiest sounds to add to a film, I think.
And a song, right? Because they have a dance party in the middle.
Where people get eaten, and yet other people just clog up the hallway fighting about something unrelated that we're never quite clear about what's going on, despite all the carnage happening in the other room.
Exactly.
It's very strange.
So many weird side plots. Like the whole beginning section of the movie about this man on his honeymoon coming home. And then he's like waylaid by the sheriff to come and do his deputy duty. And it's just like, oh my gosh, why are we doing this?
That their actor playing the deputy sheriff, who quickly becomes the interim sheriff once the sheriff dies, that guy is our director.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow, he wrote and directed this? Did he produce this as well, Chris? Is he another Ed Wood?
Let's talk about that. This movie has a bit of notoriety about it for being a very bad and a very interestingly bad movie. And yet it's such a low budget movie that there's not a lot of like behind the scenes stuff around it. So when some people were interested in considering making a documentary about it, they had their work cut out for them.
When were they making this documentary? Is it something that's more recent? Is it from the 80s?
It's from the 2010s.
Okay.
So I think around 2010, 2011 is when they started doing the initial interviews for this.
Why in the 2010s did they decide to do a documentary of the creeping terror?
Well, as I understand it, the director, Pete Schuerman, saw this on TV when he was a kid, and it was like a movie he'd never heard of. Like normally you see the creature feature movies on TV and it's all the usual suspects, but this came on and it was like nothing else, and he got completely obsessed with this weird movie. And so when he grows up and he starts to like make films or think about doing this sort of thing, this is a potential project.
Huh.
So he gets a producer interested, and they go out and they start talking to some of the people who are still alive, or who were at the time still alive, who were involved in it. And they start to realize, yeah, there is kind of a story here, because the more that he uncovered about the making of the film, and in particular about Vic Savage, who also had a million other names. Born Arthur Nichols White, went by Art Nichols. I don't know. He kept changing his name. He's that kind of guy. Okay.
Wow.
and he went with Vic Savage. So
I can see how he got that from Art Nichols, obviously.
So they just kept uncovering more and more bizarre details, and they decided that they wanted to make a documentary about this.
Nice. Okay.
The documentary, however, which is called The Creep Behind the Camera, turned out a bit different because they didn't have a lot of B-roll, right? They had some talking heads interviews that they thought were pretty good, but they didn't really have anything to illustrate what was going on other than the film itself. So they decided to get actors to recreate a lot of the interesting scenes from Vic Savage's life.
Like when you do an actor reenactment of something in one of the true crime drama type things?
Well, more like they were trying to make Tim Burton's film Ed Wood, but about Vic Savage. But they also kept some of the interview footage in, and also they made it a little animated film about what the original script was supposed to be about.
So, like, I watched Ed Wood recently, and Ed Wood is clearly a movie about Ed Wood made by people who think he is charming and wonderful. And like, it very much comes off with this idea that everyone involved in that project, or at least like the main players involved, there's a lot of love. It just beams from the movie as you're watching it.
Absolutely.
And nothing you were saying makes me think that that's going to be the feel of watching the creep behind the camera.
100% the opposite direction, this movie. If Ed Wood is painting the best, most optimistic picture of Ed Wood, Tim Burton said he was trying to do it from Ed Wood's own point of view, like how he would tell his own story.
Sure.
And doing that for a person who had been, made fun of in the discourse for decades and who maybe deserved a little bit of a boost. Then the creep behind the camera is a character assassination of a man who deserved it.
Oh, that's so fascinating.
Now, before we get to that, I want to just say, based on the original story, do you know where this movie is supposed to be taking place? Do you know where the alien is supposed to have landed?
I have no idea. It feels like a small town America type thing.
Lake Tahoe.
Stop it. That is not Lake Tahoe. I've been to Lake Tahoe and I watched Bonanza. That is not Lake Tahoe.
No, it's very much not Lake Tahoe. It's a little swamp that is probably attached to the Spawn Ranch, which we'll get into in a bit.
Okay.
But no, this was supposed to be originally set in Lake Tahoe. The idea was that the monster would land, go into the water, go across to to sort of the civilization, and that whole scene that took place in the dance hall was supposed to take place in a casino.
Oh. I do have to say that a carpet monster in a casino sounds way scarier.
Yeah.
Because they have all of those like crazy carpets, right? Like it's part of the overstimulation of being inside of the casino. It's just that you have these carpets where you can never really tell how dirty it is or what's been spilled. So if you have a carpet monster that's coming towards you, like it actually seems genuinely frightening if the floor is going to come up and start eating people off of the slot machines. Somehow in the wilds around town where there's very few people, it just doesn't come off the same.
Yeah. No, absolutely. The guy who wrote the story, whose name is Alan Silliphant, the brother of a much more famous guy, Sterling Silliphant. He wrote like Naked City, Perry Mason, Route 66. He also did The Towering Inferno, The Poseidon Adventure. He did the Mickey Mouse Club. He wrote for them early on. He had a huge career. He was a big thing. His brother, not so much.
It's really hard to be the brother of a really successful screenwriter.
Vic Savage wanted to impress investors, so you make a little mistake, who's gonna know?
Oh, like everyone now. Jeez.
Sure. So at this point, I have to issue a content warning because we're going to be talking about some very serious stuff that we're not going to dwell on, but content warning for domestic and sexual abuse and things like that. So, Vic Savage, Arthur Nichols White, had a bad upbringing. Just had a terrible upbringing, it sounds like. And that's not to excuse anything he ever did, but he was definitely one of those lives that gets fallen through the cracks as, absent father, alcoholic mother, gets dropped off at a boys' school, has a rough time of it. In his early life, he has to turn to hustling to make any living, etc.
Yeah.
Real rough stuff. He meets his future wife, and she's coming from an abusive situation. Her mother's very abusive, especially in a religiously inflected way. And he sort of is aggressively forward towards her. And he convinces her to run away to LA and proceeds to be absolutely awful to her.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Oh.
As he's trying to make it in Hollywood, he is trying to make connections with people, trying to hook up with people, trying to get people, prospective actors to sign up to be in a film of his, and also to pay him for the privilege of being in the film of his.
Oh.
And also, if they are women, to sleep with him. Which he understands is part of just how you're going to make it in Hollywood. And so he will bring these women home and be in the one room having sex with them while his wife and babies are in the other room.
You're right. This man is awful.
Yep.
Wow. Wow.
And he is, of course, constantly trying to make connections. There are scenes of him stalking Mamie Van Doren,
No.
who, at least as depicted in the film, sicks a big dog on him when he tries to get into her house. Very, very barbed wire style.
Excellent. Get out, she said.
And also stalks Lucille Ball.
What?
He gets sort of taken down quickly by a bodyguard or something.
I mean, seriously, these are not like low level celebrities. You know, like if you're going to be stalking people in Hollywood, like these big names have got to have more protection than he can possibly get past. God, I hope so. Oh my gosh.
He's a real piece of work.
Okay, so the movie Ed Wood actually has this big theatrical release. People watch it because it actually makes Ed Wood look like a really nice guy that people like, and the people making it like. This movie you're describing sounds awful, and I'm really sorry you had to watch it because it in no way sounds like it would be anything other than like horrific to watch. Like, is there any redeeming thing that this guy does?
No, there's no redeeming thing he does. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad film, though
No,
it is
it's
a
just
hard
to watch things like that, you know?
Because I will say the reenactments are done in a very over-the-top style, which kind of works and kind of doesn't. It feels like a very stylistic, intentional choice, but it also can sensationalize a lot of the things that it's showing, especially when it's showing scenes of domestic abuse. It doesn't go as far as it could to be prurient about that, but it's definitely showing you things. And if those things are at all upsetting for you to watch, this is going to be a hard watch and probably not worth it. But, you know, it seems to have happened. They do interview that first wife, whose name is Lois Wiseman, who also would write a, semi-autobiographical novel about her time with Vic Savage called Hollywood Con Man, which I have not read, but I assume that's where some of these details are coming from.
Did he get to make other movies after The Creeping Terror?
No, but he did manage to make one beforehand. It's called Street Fighter. It came out in 1959. Lois has a co-writing credit on that movie, so that's interesting. But when the movie comes out, according to this documentary, he takes all the money and heads back to Connecticut to pick up a childhood sweetheart.
What?
The childhood sweetheart he picks up, who I believe becomes his second wife, is 15 years old.
Yeah, Chris!
He has not been in Connecticut for many years now.
He had a child. So it's bad enough to have a childhood sweetheart, 15 years old. Like when you're like it's her childhood, not his at that. I can't process this.
This is the language that Lois uses for this, which
I can't process this. This is awful.
Yep.
He's awful.
He's very awful. He is very awful. Yep.
Gosh.
The guy who plays the doctor in Creeping Terror, the actor's name was Bill Thurlby, and he also was the major financier for the movie.
For The Creeping Terror.
For The Creeping Terror. He gets interviewed for the movie, and he passed away, I think, shortly before the documentary was released. He's just, giving this guy money, and Vic is going and spending it on fancy champagne so that he can sleep with people who want to be actors and have sex with them in his home in the room next to his wife. Now, according to this movie, at some point, Vic leaves. He just skips town.
Okay.
And Thurlby happens to go by the house to try to figure out where this guy is, who he owes him all this money, who he's put get it to me soon, or, yada, yada. And Thurlby happens to find the film, like the canisters of film that have somehow been left behind when he skipped town.
Okay.
So he takes them and finds some people to make anything out of it that they could. Like it's a mess, right? It's just footage. There's no scene markers. There's no notes for anything. There's no script. They're just racking their heads there's no sound. There's nothing. There's nothing at all. So they're doing the best that they can in editing it and coming up with a voiceover. There's a scene where somebody asks the guy who's doing the narration whether he spells his last name with one L or two, and the narrator says, "If you put my name in the credits, I will kill you."
Ooh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a terrible movie. It's made by a terrible guy who was using it to do terrible things. And then it's like Frankensteined by somebody who just finds the canister of this.
He had paid for the movie, at least.
Well, yeah, but he just finds the film but has to Frankenstein a movie out of the film as it currently exists. What a horrible situation in every way.
And then he finds a distributor who's like, yeah, this is an awful film, but we can probably make a few dollars from it.
We can double feature this thing, yeah.
Exactly. So one of the other things that I mentioned earlier is that some of the filming seems to have taken place on the Spahn Ranch, which you may have heard of before.
No.
The Spahn Ranch was a ranch that was rented out for movies and TV shows and so forth.
Oh, okay.
And would later become famous because it gained some new tenants when Charles Manson got kicked out of his home in San Francisco. They relocated to the Spahn Ranch, and that's where they were when all the really bad stuff that you've heard of happened with Charles Manson.
Did Vic Savage just open up a hellmouth? Is that what this is? Is this a hellmouth? He's the instigator of it? Ah!
So in the documentary, they show him meeting Charles Manson, and that Charles Manson, like, hooks him up with some of the guns and some of the cars in the film.
Great.
The person who plays Charles Manson does a really, really bad job with it. I don't know. It's the weirdest performance of Manson I've ever seen. But one of the things about this movie is that the bad guy characters are kind of always bad. So, like, Vic Savage is presented as being kind of always in a manic evil mode, or, you know, trying to, like, I don't know, win someone over, and so he's acting really heavily as a, like, I'm going to be a manipulator now.
Okay.
You know, in one way or the other, or I'm sobbing because I've ruined my life, but it's only a show.
Okay.
Like, he's always at full blast in that mode.
He's always 100% evil.
Yeah, exactly. And similarly, Charles Manson is 100% maniac in all of his scenes.
Okay.
He's just like cackling and out of it. And like, we've seen The Creeping Terror. Like, the Vic Savage actual guy had some charm to him. He was not looking like a complete awful person the whole time. Like,
No, he's the guy who is the under sheriff who becomes sheriff, right?
yeah.
Yeah, he just seems bland in the movie. I would not describe that as charismatic.
And no, that's to say that he didn't do terrible things, but just like, I don't know, at a certain point, you have to be a little bit charming. It feels like you can't just be evil 100% all the time.
I guess, yeah. Are you suggesting that the documentary is going 110% in on a very particular story and not showing that it might have had more nuance?
Yeah. I mean, also, like, Charles Manson got to the Spahn Ranch in, I believe, 68, maybe 67, but he certainly wasn't there in 63
64?
when this was being filmed, because he was in jail. And it did take them several years to film this, believe it or not, but it may be. I mean, Charles Manson shows up in, like, places, you know, the whole Beach Boys connection, like, you know, he's around as a creative person, so, like, maybe, but that particular thing struck a lot of people as being probably not true, and it feels like, I don't know, it just feels like they didn't do their full due diligence. Although, I think in broad strokes, he's probably as terrible as this movie lets out. But there's not enough, like, footnotes, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And after the beginning of the movie, the conversational parts, the interviews, get shorter and shorter, and there's just more and more of these big scenes, these big soap opera style scenes of everybody, you know, acting over the top and all the drama in his life. And it's like, I don't know, at a certain point it starts to not seem true anymore, or as true as it should. You just don't know. Now, Ed Wood also makes stuff up, right? Like that, there's this really great scene where he meets Orson Welles that never happened. And there's a whole bunch of other little things throughout it that are not quite true to the truth. But, you know, you sort of get it. Like, you sort of understand why they're bending the truth. You have to in a biopic. That's fine.
Sure. But let's also note that, like, Ed Wood is not setting itself out to be a documentary.
Yes.
Like, at no point in time does Tim Burton's Ed Wood movie suggest that it is a documentary presenting a capital T truth about Ed Wood. It is a fictionalized version that is, I don't know, maybe in the spirit of the true Ed Wood, but not like, capitalizing any part of that word.
Yeah.
I walked away from the movie Ed Wood feeling like I hadn't had a general broad stroke understanding of who Ed Wood was as a person and how he operated through life, but I would not have been able to say that anything that I saw in the movie was accurately portraying history in some sort of way. But The Creep Behind the Camera, you said, was like a documentary that was doing these reenactments, but its main purpose was to be a documentary about the making of a movie. It just, if you're saying you're making a documentary, you're holding yourself to a different line than if you're making a movie.
Yeah. And it's just so hard to tell where some of this information comes from. And I haven't even told you the worst allegations that they make about Vic, and I'm not going to.
I can't even imagine that there's something worse. How can there be something worse?
Use your imagination, but I'm not going to talk about it on pod.
I absolutely will not use my imagination for this.
Okay.
I don't even want to know what could be worse than what you have already said. It's already bad enough.
But they are allegations that you really hope have some evidence behind them before you go about throwing them around just to sensationalize your movie.
No, that's very true. Yeah.
And I just don't trust that that's the case. I don't know.
How much of what was in the earlier parts of the movie do you trust? Like, do you think he was really a despicable human being?
Oh yeah, everybody who they talk to agrees on this.
Okay.
This is generally agreed upon. I fully believe that fundamentally he was a real bad guy, much worse than any of the other directors of these fun, quirky movies that we've ever looked at. I mean,
Okay.
So fundamentals are true. I believe, generally speaking, the testimony of all these people. There are some specifics that feel like they might not have been. Like, I don't necessarily know if the Mamie Van Doren incident happened, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Or, I just don't feel like there was a level of fact checking behind that. Although maybe there was, but there's no way to tell because there's no citations or there's no way to do the paper trail. I don't know. They didn't include the full interviews on the disc as a bonus feature.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Okay. I will say two other things I want to bring up. One is that there's one person who comes off really great, especially when you go and read his bio on IMDb, and that is John Lackey, who is the guy who designed the creeping monster and who actually ran it, like who was in it for much of this.
Oh, he was the guy at the front of the carpets moving around the tower face?
Yeah. Apparently he was like almost 6'7". So, according to IMDb, very tall man, really interesting guy. He spent most of his time at Renaissance fairs.
Oh, excellent. Perfect.
Playing the recorder and the Irish harp. He would do all sorts of different artists' things. He was a sculptor. It says here, street theater and court pageantry innovative director, photographer, and much more. He did all sorts of stuff with like early medieval classical music and Renaissance music.
He sounds amazing.
Who will forget the respect John taught us for the correct brewing of exotic teas? Like, all sorts of great stuff here. Everything about this is exciting. And in the film, he just comes off as like this interesting weirdo who's, trying to design this very eldritch creature, but like Vic won't give him a budget and he won't give him direction. He's just like, make something that'll find cool. And it's like, okay, that's not how it works. And after a while, because Vic keeps not paying him, just like he doesn't pay anybody, he shows up to Vic and says that the monster has gone into hiding.
Oh, has it now?
And there's a scene of them sort of absconding with the monster in the middle of the night that looks very much like the opposite of when they liberate that monster in Ed Wood.
Yes. Oh.
So Vic has to like make an even worse monster to finish the filming.
Oh my gosh.
There's one other person who comes off pretty well in the documentary. And it is the guy who did the title sequence.
The spider web. What did they
Yeah.
say? Yeah, it was like a spider web, but it was also like a tunnel. It reminded me of like the spider webby tunnels that they have in the Coraline movie.
So his name is Richard Edlund.
Mm-hmm.
He is interviewed in the film. He has nothing nice to say about Vic Savage, of
Fair
course.
Fair enough.
And of course, he went on to get many, many Academy Awards for special effects and visual effects in films such as Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Never heard of him. Wow. Okay. Did he cut his teeth on the Creeping Terror? Like, was this a very early thing for him?
Yes, it was. I believe that is the only movie he has before Star Wars in his credit. In his
oh my gosh. So he didn't do
filmography.
anything for like 10 years?
Or nothing that had his name on it. I don't want to
Okay.
say that much, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm glad he cut his teeth on something, I guess. It's just, sometimes I think about platforms and MST3K can choose any bad movie, right? Like they can choose anything that they consider a bad sci-fi movie or something, like it doesn't have to be this one. And they chose this one for some reason, and it gave another platform for the Creeping Terror to be noticed, right?
Oh, yeah.
And this man who made this movie is so awful. I kind of wish they hadn't. You know what I mean? Just like, I don't want elevation to happen for some of the people who made things in the 60s, right? And there are just some things that I wish did get... Well, I was going to say, I wish these things did get forgotten, but then I watched the movie The Fog, and you can't forget your history because it comes up out of the ocean in fog and kills your whole town. So you know what? Never mind. I'm glad they brought it up so that we could learn about this horrible man.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 slow-paced fun facts creeping up about today's experiment, the Creeping Terror. Go, Charlotte, go!
The music in this film was composed by Frederick Kopp. This is the only film that Frederick Kopp is credited as a composer for. So, what's his story? Hey, Chris, can we skip the Shallow 13 today and take a visit to the score corner? The scorner? Please?
Oh, sure. Okay, here's what I can tell you about Frederick Kopp. He was about 50 years old when he did the music for The Creeping Terror.
Okay.
He was a conductor and orchestrator. He studied under Pierre Monteux, who was the guy who conducted the premiere of The Rite of Spring.
Oh my gosh.
The Stravinsky work that led to the riot.
Yes.
A work which Pierre Monteux completely hated and thought was trash, but whatever, he was talked into it.
Sure. And then Disney picked it up and put it in Fantasia, so why not?
Exactly, yeah. People like it now.
Yeah.
Some people argue that the upset was more about the dancing than the music. The dancing was so stompy that they couldn't hear the music anyways, which is wild if that's
stomping.
true. There's a whole mythos around that concert and blah, blah, blah. He studied with a few other guys too, but they're not even remotely interesting.
Wow, we're going to get letters about that, Chris. But all right, go on.
If people want to write in and justify that Gustav Strube and Louis Hasselmans were actually interesting people that I should care about, I am here for it. That is what I am here for. I just don't think it's going to happen, and I couldn't find anything fun to say about it.
All right, fair enough. Back on track.
Okay, so someone wrote Frederick Kopp a letter in 1991 about his appearance in something connected to the Golden Turkey Awards, which the Medveds do.
Mm-hmm.
They also appear in that documentary. And he then got a letter back from Frederick, and then a few years ago posted it to Reddit.
Oh.
And it's a very fun letter to read. It's all typed on a typewriter because it's 1991 and he's an old man by then. He is basically unimpressed with anyone making fun of his music. He insists at one point that there's nothing avant-garde about his music, which is an interesting thing, and we'll get to that later.
Mm-hmm.
He seems quite proud of his musical success, although that success is entirely limited to the soundtrack to this film.
Sorry.
He also shouts out that his youngest son, Pierre, plays the boy in the scene with Grandpa, by the lake.
Sure. Okay, cool.
He notes that Pierre never got paid, even though he was promised to get paid.
Well, I mean, it's fine.
That's our Vic Savage.
She's not a hot lady, so.
They didn't get paid either. Everybody had to pay Vic to be in his movies, remember?
Right. Oh my gosh.
Anyway, it's a really fun letter. We'll link to it in the show notes. But also, please, while you're there, scroll down a little bit and note that one of Frederick's granddaughters, one of Pierre's daughters, was delighted to see this letter and commented, "Oh gosh, content warning continues. Frederick was a horrible racist, wife/child-beating narcissist.
Oh my
Our
gosh.
family was bankrupted because of the terrible movie. His wife barely spoke much and wrote a letter hidden in my birth announcement begging for help that no one ever opened. Frederick never accomplished anything in his life other than cheating on his wife, beating his kids, having bastard kids, and losing all his money on a film while blaming everyone else. I love seeing this stuff and the people who pissed him off because he ruined a whole lot of lives and should rot in hell."
Whoa!
Just amazing.
Amazing.
I'm so sorry that you had to go through that, granddaughter of Frederick Kopp,
Yeah.
despite what an earworm that dance is.
Wow.
I'm glad you are enjoying how much he hated people making fun of him. And I hope this episode of MST3K does you a lot of good. The documentary, The Creep Behind the Camera, doesn't mention any of that, though Frederick Kopp does appear in a scene. It suggests that the orchestra performing the music in the film was actually a Glendale high school band. But it seems like at the time, Kopp was teaching at what was then called Los Angeles State College. So it feels more likely that that's the sort of people who would be performing it. But the documentary, once again, doesn't cite any sources on this one, so who knows?
Well, it makes sense that they didn't include Kopp if he was as bad as Vic, because it's like, well, we already have a villain.
That's true.
How many villains can we possibly have? This is not like the League of Legends or anything.
Anyway, that's the Scorner.
Fun Scorner. I'm sorry I interrupted the Shallow 13 for it. So, Chris, I wanted to talk about the show Love American Style, but now that we've talked about all of these like creepy jerks that did nothing but take advantage of women the whole time, I don't know if I want to talk about Love American Style anymore.
Come on, it's a 70s sitcom. It's going to be uplifting and peppy.
The theme song certainly is.
All right, the theme song absolutely is amazing.
Oh, it slaps. It's great.
I've not really watched the show. It confused me when I saw it on reruns on Nick at Night when I was a kid, so I just noped on that.
Oh, that's totally fair.
But I would absolutely stick around for the theme song. Hey,
Yeah.
do you know who wrote that theme song?
No, who wrote the theme song?
A little guy named Charles Fox. Does that name sound familiar to you?
It should sound familiar to me. Why?
Well, he wrote a bunch of other TV show theme songs.
Like the theme song for Silver Spoons?
Like the theme song to Happy Days, the Making Our Dreams Come True one.
Yes.
And Laverne and Shirley, and he did the Love Boat theme,
Oh,
and he also did
nice.
some film scores, including Barbarella
What? That is a
and
great score.
The Green Slime. We just talked about this guy.
Oh my gosh, we just talked about this guy. No wonder why his name should have sounded familiar. Wow. Well, he writes some banging songs. Like, those things are all great. Like, every single one of those themes that you said, they played in my head for a little bit as you were saying the names of the songs, right? Like, not a single one of them was one where I was like, how does that one go again? No. Like, they all are fabulous. And this theme song for Love American Style, absolutely true. The same. In fact, I don't know if I ever saw an episode of Love American Style, but I knew the theme song for Love American Style when they were singing Love Satellite Style and doing the little sketches on the segment.
I think I put it on a mixtape for you back in the day.
You probably did. Oh my gosh.
I did that for a while because that song is such a banger.
It's so good, but the show is not as good.
No, so the show was a 69 into the 70s show, and it was like little sketches about love American Style, I guess it didn't usually have recurring characters, although I think sometimes it did.
So I'm just going to boil down after watching, and I didn't watch all the seasons. I didn't watch all the shows. I watched about
I
5
hope
episodes, but I want to boil down what Love American Style is.
Mm-hmm.
It's cheating on your wife with your secretary.
Yeah.
That's what Love American Style is.
The one episode that I tried to watch and had to bail about halfway through because it really was, I forget what it was called, but it was about women's lib. And it involved, there's these 2 male roommates, and one of them dresses up as a woman to infiltrate a women's lib convention and brings the other guy along too. And then there's all sorts of like hitting on women and knowing what it is to be a woman when people are hitting on you and making jokes about how I'm not the one you want, honey. Like the worst possible version of Some Like It Hot.
Oh, it was bad. The one that I watched. So, you know how much Crow loves Jack Klugman.
Oh, yeah. We all do.
Don't we all? Exactly. So when I went to YouTube and saw that there was a Love American Style episode with Jack Klugman, I was like, well, I have to watch this one. The Crow is leading me to this particular episode. And the episode had Jack Klugman, and he was married, and his wife was an excellent wife in that she maintained the home, and she cooked meals for him, and she wore like Frau house dress type things. And, she like wasn't hot anymore because they'd been married for a while. And he had been having a whole series of affairs, which she knew about, but he was just finding out that she knew. And he was trying to encourage her to find a person to cheat on him with. And so he encouraged his wife to start working out and to become hot again and to be able to fit into her clothes so that she could start dating somebody else. And of course, he brings home a friend from the office because he's like, oh, you'll really like this lady that I'm setting you up with because you like home cooked meals and stuff. And that's what she does really well. And then, of course, she comes out in her hot dress and he's like, man, my wife is hot. You can't date her anymore. And that was the whole episode. So it was like, it was just horrible. It was horrible because the whole premise was that like, it's cool for him to be having an affair all this time.
Yeah.
And she's just going to be a housewife at home and not be worried about it or bothered by it.
Yeah. We have to mention real quick, because otherwise people will write in, that yes, Love American Styles was the show that Happy Days spun off of, as well as the animated show Wait Till Your Father Gets Home, which my brother was a big fan of, despite it being not great, but whatever. But so, do you think that 20 years later, it was finally time to stick it to Love American Style? And do you think that Mike and the Bots did a good job of that?
Yes, I feel like sticking it to Love American Style was not a bad thing to do. I'm not sure that they did, though. Like, all of their sketches were like, I don't understand you. All right. I mean, like, that was the whole thing. It's a real weird send-up, but the song was great. So, like, 100% gotta hand it to Love Satellite Style. So, Chris, this whole episode has been super depressing about terrible people. Maybe you have a final factoid that isn't about someone terrible. Could it be?
I do.
Oh, good.
It's about a riff that you might have missed. Early in the film, Crow makes a comment about the music.
Is the band tuning up? Like ionization.
Did you hear that riff?
I don't think I did.
Yeah, this is one of those riffs that's said very, very quietly, and it's also about something very, very obscure. So it's all the more excited if, like me, you actually hear it and you know what it's talking about and you get the joke.
What's it about? Tell me the joke.
All right. Edgar Varese was a classical music composer from the first half of the 20th century. He was French, as you might have guessed from his name, though he spent a lot of his life in the U.S., and he was a bit experimental. He was very interested in noise. And he basically said, what is music if it's not organized noises?
Oh, okay.
So around 1930, he wrote a piece called Ionisation, which was more or less the first piece in the classical tradition to be written entirely for percussion.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's about 6 minutes long. It's very clangy. It's very noisy. It's a pretty fun piece. You should check it out. He did a lot of interesting stuff. He eventually wrote a piece called Poème électronique, which,
Ooh.
as the name suggests, is a piece of electronic music, which was written to be performed in a pavilion at the 1958 World's Fair in Brussels.
What?
It was played out of several hundred individual speakers in this oddly shaped pavilion. It's a very fun bleepy bloopy piece. I quite like it. He also has a piece for solo flute called Density 21.5, which is my favorite piece of his. He's an interesting composer, but, how did the good folks at MST3K hear about this relatively obscure, kind of important in avant-garde circles, but pretty obscure composer?
How? You got to pull this full circle for me.
Well, Edgar Varese happened to be the musical hero of Frank Zappa.
Oh, wow. I mean, of course, but wow.
Yeah. Zappa got his hands on an album of Varese's music when he was like 12 or 13.
Uh-huh.
He read an article about it where the music was like being used to test hi-fi equipment because it had lots of interesting sounds, but it was described as being basically unlistenable.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
but it was a lot of drum sounds. And Zappa was like, I've been studying drum. I got to hear this. I got to hear. He looked everywhere for it. He finally found it. He gave them all his money. He takes it home. He listens to it again and again and again. Eventually, it's his birthday. As he's like a teenager. He's like 15, I think.
Uh-huh.
And his mom's like, I'll give you $5 for whatever you want for your birthday. And he's like, can I make a long distance phone call to Edgar Varese?
No.
And so
Really?
he does.
What?
And it's a very awkward call, but it wasn't the worst possible call imaginable. He then is visiting the East Coast and writes to him. He's living in New York and tries to meet with him. That can't happen, but he gets a nice letter back. And basically a lot of people hear about Varese, and in particular Ionisation, because of this Zappa connection. There's some really wonderful writings that Zappa wrote about Varese. We have a copy of the letter that he sent as a 16-year-old to Varese saying, I hope I can meet with you. I'm on the East Coast. Please, please, please.
Oh my gosh.
Really great stuff.
It's Frank Zappa fanboying out about somebody else. It's so fantastic.
It's also great because it's like, he talks about how he had trouble as a 12-year-old reading the liner notes of this intensely music academic where he's like, I don't know what polyphony means. I don't know what anything means. I just think this sounds great.
Yes.
And he tried to get all his friends and he marked on his record with chalk where all the good sections were so that he could skip ahead on the record. It's really adorable. It's really amazing. And I like Varese well enough. I think he's totally worth checking out, especially the 3 pieces I mentioned. I'll have links in the show notes to it.
Mm-hmm.
But yay. And as far as I know, Varese was a nice guy and didn't do anything horrible that they're going to make a documentary about.
Yay. Thank you, Chris. That's really, really phenomenal and uplifting. And how wonderful to know that Frank Zappa was just excited to talk to and meet someone that he thought was a phenomenal maker of music.
Who was just flat out ignored at that point in his life.
If only Ed Wood had had somebody like that.
Yeah. If he'd held on a little longer, maybe he would have, but yep.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you want to share your fan art of the creeping terror, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our email is info@itsjustashow.com, and we would love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you and like our randomly selected supporter, Lars. Thank you, Lars. For about $1 an episode, you can be like Lars and help us research and record this show. You can join us in a friendly Discord, and you can listen to all our super fan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/163. I don't even know if I want to ask what we're watching next. Could it be worse than The Creeping Terror? It has to be better, right?
It seems like it has to be better. We will be watching season 6, still in season 6. Wow. Episode 13 The Sinister Urge, written, directed, and produced by Ed Wood.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I get to put my my feelings about Ed Wood from this very loving biopic to the test and actually rewatch an episode of MS3K that is about his movie.
Yeah, it's also got the short Keeping Clean and Neat. But until we celebrate more of Ed Wood's centennial, until next time...
If my deepest, darkest despair had choreography, this would be it.
The unbearable whiteness of being. Take it away, Theme Squad. Who will forget the respect John taught us for the correct brewing of exotic teas?